Chapter 12. The Druid. Draco sent a message ahead, using the same silvery white light from his wand as they had seen Harry use earlier. Then he made a portkey out of the crumpled parchment, which Harry authorised. "Yay! Portkey!" Lydia chirruped. After another fairground ride, they found themselves in a field on a hillside. The hill behind them had a rusty, disused winding gear tower on top of it. Clearly it had been a mine at some point in the past. Between the winding gear and themselves were a few houses, indicating that there was probably a road on the other side of a nearby hedgerow. A seagull called overhead as it made its way towards the hilltop. They walked towards the hedgerow and, sure enough, a road lay beyond. The road made its way down the hill to a village below. They walked towards the village. There was no footpath, so they had to step off the road onto the grass verge as the occasional car passed them. They soon reached the village, passing a primary school on a slight ridge, which gave way to another dip beyond. They passed a small housing estate, and the road began to rise. "Not far now," Draco assured them. "Not wishing to appear boastful," said Ambrose, "but I have been here before. I used to work on Anglesey some years ago. The big hill behind us is Mynydd Parys, the copper mountain, where copper has been mined on and off since before the Romans." "That's right," Draco confirmed. "The port beyond was a real boomtown in the Industrial Revolution. They used to ship copper ore all over the world." "Where were you meeting the druids, Draco?" "Right here," Draco said, indicating the village shop on their right. The shop was a standard rural post office and tobacconists, and sweet shop, and general store. A small bell tinkled over the door as they entered. The lady storekeeper welcomed them. "What can I get for you, my dears?" she solicited them. "I'm here to talk with a druid," Draco announced. "Oh yes, dear, you'll be the professor. Draco Malfoy," he introduced himself. "We are all together." "Just tap the china dog with your wand," the shopkeeper said, pointing to a small figure of a black and white dog on one of the shelves. Draco did as she suggested, and the shelves slid aside to reveal a large oaken door. "Hevina is waiting for you," the shopkeeper told them. "She got your message, Professor." Ambrose shuffled forward, crowding behind Draco with Lydia. "It's all right, dear," the shopkeeper soothed. "Nobody will come in the shop while the door is visible." "Oh," said Ambrose, "I didn't want to give the game away, as it were." The room beyond the door was cosily decorated, with subdued lighting. A woman rose from a chair at a large table. She was grey-haired, quite tall and welcoming, yet dignified and faintly formal. "Professor Malfoy," she greeted Draco. "Interesting to hear from you again." "Pnandar, Hevina," said Ambrose. Her eyes widened, and her mouth opened. She stood like that for a few seconds, then broke into a smile. "Emrysbach," she replied. "Ti'n iawn?" "Arbennig o dda, cariad," Ambrose smiled. He turned to the others to explain. "When I was working as an electrician here some years ago, I lived in a village on the other side of the mountain from here. Hevina and I were neighbours. I had no idea, of course, that she was a druid." "And you were called Emrys back then?" Lydia asked. "Emrys is simply the Welsh form of Ambrose," he explained. "Please come in, all of you," Hevina smiled. "Take a seat and I'll get you some tea and biscuits." She looked at Ambrose, Lydia noticed. "I was always especially fond of Hevina's biscuits," he smiled sheepishly. "I'm afraid I used to make quite the pig of myself." That said, a teapot, teacups, and all manner of afternoon tea paraphernalia appeared on the table, along with a huge platter of biscuits accompanied by a delicious waft of fresh baking smells. A look passed between Ambrose and Hevina. They both smiled. As far as Lydia could work out from the conversation that followed, the druids, or druidon in Welsh, were magical people like the witches and wizards, but they had much closer links with muggles in their daily lives. They would often help heal muggles. They let muggles join in their ancient ritual traditions. They even allowed muggles to join their society and be called druids. They upheld this international statute of secrecy by deflecting tension away from the personal performance of magic. They would insist that any magic came from their rituals, giving the muggle druids the impression that they too could perform magic or make potions. The rituals, it turned out, were rooted in the rituals of the old magic. This was why Draco had wanted to talk to the druids. Havina confirmed much that Draco had suspected. She was suitably impressed that Lydia had thought of the idea of the Great Circle. She agreed that forming a circle which passed through points of power or significance was an important technique. However, she had never known a circle on the scale of the one that they were tracking. The centre of such a circle, she confirmed, would be the focus of its power. Such circles were traditionally used to imbue an object with lasting power. The object would generally be jewellery, a wand, or a potion. Harry asked if a weapon could be given power in this way. The druids, she insisted, have nothing to do with weapons of any kind, but Havina supposed it was possible. There were even folklore tales which suggested this had been done in the distant past. Lydia started to lose her concentration on what was being said, and watched how the others were acting and reacting. She noticed that, as Draco was asking questions or explaining things to Harry and Ron, Havina would sit still and unfocused, as if she were hearing a different conversation. Lydia wondered if she were relaying information to other druids in some magical way. Lydia studied everyone around the table. Harry was concentrating on every word, soaking it up and weighing the consequences. He frequently asked questions. Ron sat back in his chair and said barely a word as the conversation passed back and forth around the table. He looked sceptical. It seemed from the few things he did say that he did not respect or possibly even trust the druids. Havina, when not having her blank moments, seemed reluctant to give away too much about the ways of the druids. An air of mutual lack of trust, bordering on hostility, bristled between her and Ron. On the other hand, the atmosphere between her and Draco was filled with trust. The professor was driving the conversation. He was mostly testing what understanding he already had and seeking confirmation, rather than probing their hostess for information. The way he spoke of the old magic and of the druids was respectful. He deferred to Havina's knowledge and concerns. He never pushed when it was clear that she knew further details but was unwilling to reveal druidic secrets. He was like a student learning from a revered teacher. Yet, much of the time, Havina was looking at Ambrose as she talked. It was as though she was giving her explanations and her knowledge to him. Lydia couldn't understand this at first. Then she wondered if Havina felt guilty about hiding her true nature from Emrysbach for so long. Havina and her uncle might have been close all those years ago. Lydia wondered how close Havina and Uncle Ambrose were in age. He had grey in his hair too, but did his beard make him look older than he was? He spoke like he came from a long-lost time, at least to Lydia's mind. The way he used words was a bit posh, but his accent wasn't so posh. It was hard to place his accent. It seemed to change depending on who he was talking to. And he could speak Welsh. She'd never known. But then she had never known that he had lived here. Her uncle would confuse things. He would refer to events from before Lydia had been born as the other day. But some of his cultural references were right up to date. And his sense of humour was weird. Annoying was probably more accurate than weird. Annoying was the word that came up most often when she thought about Uncle Ambrose. It felt as though he could easily have made things more straightforward, said things plainly, but was playing with Lydia and everyone else. She had to admit he was right about the biscuits, though. She decided she would have another one, just as soon as she woke up. Lydia. Her uncle's voice woke her. "Oh, sorry, I dozed off," she explained, though everyone had realised. "Havina has kindly found someone with a minibus to take us to the ferry terminal," Harry told her. "Something for you all to eat first, I think," she said. "The ferry is not until later this evening, and I think you need to fortify yourselves for the journey." The meal was straightforward but fresh. Everything, especially the vegetables, tasted more than they had ever tasted before. Any trace of the earlier mistrust had evaporated by the end of the meal.